Now I'm presenting this on behalf of a colleague who does a lot of the digital scanning herself. We've got an odd marriage because, well, it wasn't marriage, she's married someone, a lot of people. She's into the digital and I'm more into heritage management, sustainable heritage management, and my passion is industrial heritage, where I see the digital being a very, very effective tool. So this goes from those two examples that preceded me. This makes it more terrifying because they were beautiful examples of incredibly lovely, almost artistic historical reconstructions. What I'm dealing with here is trying to ignite a passion amongst architecture students again for history and heritage. I'm 56, Kelly's 10 years younger than I, but when we were going through architecture, heritage and conservation was an incredibly important and very strong part of our studies. And we've noticed over the last 5-10 years that the interest in it has dropped enormously. So the digital, and someone has mentioned it earlier today, that getting students interested in the digital is one way of reigniting a passion for what I call heritage forensics or architectural forensics. It's also about using, I say using students in the best possible way, but having students do work and play around with the technology and become ignited, have the right passion about conservation. And using that to reignite debates about elements in the heritage in Australia in particular that have basically been accepted as gospel. I don't know about real instances where this, but where myths have become enshrined in buildings and in places. So it's in part, referring back to Joanne, why we collect the data, in our case, is to engage students with this technology and to reignite a passion. And then also what we actually use it for. So the student work that I will be showing you looks actually amateurish compared to what we've just seen, but bear with us on what we're trying to do with it. So this is a thing called the Windmill Tower on Wickham Terrace in Brisbane. It's the oldest extant building in Queensland, Australia. Convict built in 1828, and it's the oldest surviving structure in Brisbane. So if you can imagine Brisbane, Australia was discovered 40 odd, discovered by Europeans 40 odd years before this. And Brisbane was the furthest north that any white settlement had actually ever existed. It was considered to be the sort of place where Europeans could not exist. It was really hot, sweaty, mosquito, everything you'd want to send your worst offenders up to do. So this is where Brisbane was located. Quite north, very humid. And it was a penal colony that was used for the worst of the worst offenders. So the windmill was initially built in 1828 as a windmill to grind flour. It was soon found to be obsolete because there's no wind in Brisbane. If there is, it's going with cyclonic sorts of forces, so you'd have to tone the thing down anyway. So it was used for a variety of other reasons. It's important for a number of reasons other than it being that building. It was actually put on the State Heritage List in 1992 at the very inception of the listing process at the state level in Brisbane. It does have some quite delicate historical evidence within it in terms of graffiti, and it's quite a delicate building, so it is not accessible to the public on a regular basis. And when Kelly and the students were scanning it, a lot of people would walk past and try and go inside just simply because they'd never seen it open before. So the significance is based on a number of factors. It's the place from where the original survey of Brisbane was set out from the boundaries of the city were laid out from. It was a site of the execution of some Indigenous Aboriginal people who resisted colonisation and actually murdered the colonial surveyor and the assistant. And there's a lot of conjecture because they say they were hung from the windmill, and we can't quite work out how that would have happened, but it is an interesting point to make that it is the first white building in in that place that we're going to hang these people from. So it has some fairly ugly history. There was a time bomb, which you can see in this image right at the very top, that was dropped at certain times of the day so that everyone in the colony knew what time it was. They used semaphore flags from this site because it is quite elevated in Brisbane, just to signal to the population that certain boats had come into the harbour, which is quite a way away. And it's also just by the location of telegraph radio and first TV broadcast from this particular position. So this is a sketch in 1835, and you can see the women still there with sails. This is a bit later, where the sails have actually been removed. But the building, as you can see, it appears in a lot of these early photographs simply as it's a landmark. It's a bit built out now. My colleague Kelly, so she's using a Z1 handheld laser scanner, which is not as accurate as something like a terrestrial scanner, but it certainly did the job in the wind one. You can get around it quite readily with this. And the first of the students started using the laser scanner in 2015, so this is an image by Daniel Thompson using the material gathered from the Z1 laser scanner, and that's another image from Daniel as well. And down the front there, so we have the windmill here, down the very front you can see what looks like a building ground were reservoirs for water, because it was an elevated position. They used that to store water and feed it down into Brisbane proper. So in 2017, Kelly and I, through a small grant, managed to get our hands on a Leica scanner, which is a fair bit more complex and certainly a heavier piece of kit. So Kelly started students out there experimenting with this, and they're taking it to like ducks to water. The interesting thing, she would start the elective every time by asking students why they wanted to do this elective called Digital Cultural Heritage. And typically it was dominated by sort of 8 males and 1 or 2 females. And they all said, oh, we're interested in mucking around with the digital stuff. It wasn't about the heritage. So that in itself was interesting. Then that we could actually then start to educate them about the heritage, and once we got them over the fact that it wasn't just about playing with the digital. So Jay Stocker took a real interest in this and started to produce some extremely good images. He also took it out to a jail and did an animation of a jail, an old jail that had just been closed now. And this is Kelly using a bit of bush ingenuity where she tied a GoPro to a broomstick to take a shot of the ball, because no one had ever actually gotten up that high. So the building, by European terms, is not all that old, and it doesn't need a huge amount of maintenance. It just sort of sits there and exists. So people haven't actually gotten up there to have a look at these sorts of things. So this was Kelly getting in there to do that. And the only other place you can probably get a good image of this is across the road from the hotel suites. We couldn't use things like drones in there because there are hospitals close by. They have helipads, so they would not let us do that. And there are also roads nearby, and people tend to get a bit panicked when they see drones flapping around. A little bit of graffiti inside that was also captured using the scanners. Now, gentlemen. So this is the reconstruction as it is now. This is Jay Stocker who put this together. So this was his combined material from the Leica scanner, which takes quite broad pictures of it, and the Zebedee, which we can get inside and then scan inside. next one. So this is the image of it as it is now. What I want to get onto is this image of the recreation. So what they did when they realised they didn't have enough wind was they strapped 12 convicts to the windmill, as you do in Australia. And people are cheap. So you can see there's the little treadmill for them, and the poor guys would stand up there and in Brisbane humidity, like hamsters, grinding away flour. So this is where this thing becomes really exciting, because a lot of the myth and legend about this says that in fact it wasn't two, it was only one very long treadmill. And the forensic evidence would suggest that it isn't one, it was actually two. And so the images that Jay has put together here, they're starting to look at how the thing might have worked inside using the two treadmills. And this is, they're hoping to take this a bit further, but as I speak, last week Kelly had a workshop with a number of historians. She'd advertised this amongst the Heritage Fraternity in Brisbane, and a number of people had come out and said quite openly that this was wrong, it would never work, it was quite incorrect. So this is the other exciting part, is igniting passion for architectural forensics amongst architecture students. But it's also helping with the debate within Brisbane about what this thing actually was used for. The next thing for Kelly is to look at the physical hanging of three Indigenous people, whether that could in fact have been done from the sails, as myth and legend says happened, or whether it was just a symbolic at that location that it actually happened. So that's the power, and you can see that it is quite crude compared to what we've just seen from the two previous speakers, but it is enough for us to have a conversation with historians in Brisbane about the use of this thing and how it might have actually operated. So Jay, we're hoping, the student that's done this, is finishing his Master of Architecture. He's a perfect candidate to go on and do a PhD with something like this, which is where we're hoping to take it. So the questions that this little project has raised so far. The map that's actually sitting in on the list in the State Heritage List seems to be wrong. The placement of it seems to be incorrect, and because the scanning and Leica in particular is incredibly accurate in that regard, we can go back to the Heritage Department who've been involved in this. We need to get the key from them to actually go and visit the site. It seems to indicate that their information is incorrect to begin with. The debate about the treadmill, whether it's a single or a double shaft, is currently ongoing. Kelly is having an interesting time with that, because some people can be quite adamant that they're in fact right. The issue, as I mentioned before, about the execution of the Aboriginal fighters, and whether it was from the sails or they actually located a hanging platform somewhere nearby. And starting to look at the mechanics of the actual windmill. It's not exactly high powered. It would have been made by convicts out of local materials, so it's not using sort of the fine gearing and so forth that we saw from the guitar, for example, earlier. It's not that level of fine mechanism, but we can use this forensic approach with students to work that out. So we had a small grant, a very generous grant from Mr. Huat Seng Lim, who funded a lot of the work that Jay did in recreating it. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much.